So Chapter 11 talks about auditing, and if you've had an auditing class before, it was probably a lot of repetition for you. And so you'll just want to kind of pick out the things you note that are different for governmental. And keep in mind that government and nonprofit can voluntarily adopt the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. That's something to take note of. I just wanted to go over a couple of, and maybe even just one of the cases, depending on how much time it takes. Again, just to talk to you and help you become familiar with some of the terminology. So I'm looking at case 11-11, and this is an audit engagement, and this is a mental health affiliate. It's a non-government, not-for-profit, and they've contacted a CPA office about conducting an annual audit for its first year. They that heard from a similar organization that $10,000 is appropriate price for an audit, and has offered Mr. Wise that price for the audit as well. And I will tell you, audits are very expensive. There's a lot of liability involved, a lot of responsibility involved, and a lot of work involved, and so they are very expensive, and you will hear that often in the world of accounting and especially in the world of nonprofits. And so they give you the facts. Number one, Lakeview received a $200,000 grant from the city of Lakeview, 50% being from federal sources. $150,000 was expended equally. Unrestricted gifts of $50,000 were received, and $40,000 of that was spent. The organization received $300,000 from Medicare. Lakeview received federal funding passed through Highlands County of $350,000, of which $300,000 of the funds were spent. And they carried out a program with the Federal Bureau of Prisons to provide alcohol and drug abuse counseling services for prisoners. Services were provided and reimbursed at $100, and the contract provides for maximum reimbursement of $400,000. Actual units of service for the year were 4,400. Direct cost incurred for these services amounted to $250,000 total. So you can go back through those facts as we work through. And again, this is a video. You can pause, rewind, listen to it again. But all the information you need is in case 11-11. And again, just to go over the terminology, the first question says, based on the foregoing facts, is Lakeview Mental Health Affiliates required to have a single audit? Now, they talk about single audits on page 462. They go talk about that for several pages. So if you haven't read that yet, you might want to stop and go read about what a single audit is, so that this will help you understand that better. And so we do an analysis of expenditures of federal awards, and what we're looking for is the amount of federal awards expended. So we would start this problem, for example, we have a grant from the city, $75,000 was expended. Expended is a key word there. Private gifts. We received them, we spent them, but those are not applicable. Medicare services are excluded. I'm going to put a 0 there. Excluded. This is not applicable. And again, all of this information is in your book. Pass through from county, and the amount expended there was $300,000. And then counseling services, it is maxed out at $400,000. Okay, so if we sum this, we get $775,000. And because they expended more than $750,000 in federal awards, they are required. So because greater than $750,000, required to have a single audit. So that's how you would go through that process. So then it says, should Mr. Wise accept the audit engagement for a $10,000 fee? Why or why not? And my first thought is, wow, $10,000, that's a lot of money. And so what we want to look at is the conclusion in Part A. So we look back up here. It's a single audit. They're required. Information provided in the background. So what we would conclude here is that Mr. Wise would be unwise to accept the engagement for $10,000, which is the going rate for a financial audit. So that's some key information we need to catch right there. Going rate for a financial audit. Financial audit is where we're talking about a for-profit, not a governmental or nonprofit. A single audit conducted in accordance with governmental auditing standards, and the guidance requires more audit planning, audit work, and audit reporting than a financial statement audit conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Also, as Mr. Wise notes, an auditor should not accept an engagement at a given price before evaluating the extent of the work. So if he does accept it, he should prepare an engagement letter. He should list out the requirements, and then he should provide payment based on the hours that he thinks he's going to be working on this case study. So then it said, would Mr. Wise be considered independent according to government auditing standards if he also prepares routine tax filings for the organization? And how would this be determined? So the answer to that is maybe. Mr. Wise would be required to reference GAGAS conceptual framework for independence. And by doing that and documenting that, he would determine whether or not he had the independence required to do the audit or to impair the independence of the auditor. And he would go from there in evaluating what he should do. So there is guidance for that. And again, you just want to be careful that you document it. I'm looking at these other cases. So I'm going to go ahead and look at case 1112. This is audit considerations, and a city has approached you concerning an audit. State law requires the city to have an audit and submit audited financial reports. One, you want to make sure that you're registered to do audits and that you're set up to be peer reviewed. There's a lot more to it than just making a decision to be an audit. Remember, professional competence. New elections at the beginning of the fiscal year resulted in a change in administration. You've been asked by the city to submit bids for the current year audits because the new city administration is quite inexperienced. It's not provided you with a formal request, which is an RFP, request for proposal. Therefore, you have the prior year's audit and financial reports and little more information. But you do know this, the new city controller is a CPA. For the last 3 years, the city has received a clean audit opinion. The city's receiving grants and other aid. Total budgeted revenues and expenditures are given to you. The city has 6 funds, 3 enterprise funds, and a custodial fund. You're familiar with all of that. It is 5 months until the end of the fiscal year. And you recently read in the newspaper that an employee at the city's wastewater facility has sued the city. So prior to determining whether you would be interested in submitting a bid, you decide to use the information you have to draw up a list of factors that would affect the cost of your bid. So here's what you want to look at. Number 1, the number of major units and programs. You're going to want to look at that. That will help you determine. The larger the number, the more opinions you have to offer, and your materiality changes also by unit as well, which is different for governmental auditing. You want to look at the predecessor auditor. This is always important. When a prior auditor chooses not to pursue an audit engagement, you want to know why. And so you'll want to look at that. The incoming auditor will want to determine whether there were disagreements and whether or not there were problems, and if the working papers could be made available to you. That would be very important as well. Number 3, you're over $750,000, which means this is subject to single audit. So that's going to change your consideration. You're going to want to know the number of federal programs and the amount of funds expended from each. So you're going to want to look at the federal programs because that changes your audit as well. You'll want to look at the specifics of the lawsuit, just because you want to know what you're stepping into, and the allegations of improper payments. That could point to some internal control issues as well. And then finally, you want to look at the addition of the new administration. Having a CPA with government audit experience can be good, but having a new controller in and of itself can also cause some issues for you. So you just want to be aware of what's going on in that situation. So anyway, if you, like I said, if you've had auditing, this was probably a pretty easy chapter for you, or will be an easy chapter for you. If you haven't had auditing, I highly recommend you read this chapter carefully and let me know if you have any questions. I think all of you are familiar with what an audit is. And so if you haven't had auditing, this is a great introduction for you when you take that class either next spring or the next.